as a student leader at the university, and later as a human rights defender, and of course as a member of the movement for democratic change at the time, as it was led by Dr. Morgan Richard Tsvangirai, may so rest in power. And of course, after that, I joined the Youth Assembly, as was led by Siziba as the national executive member responsible for alliance building in the youth struggles of the movement, and then later elected into the position of the Secretary General of the Youth Assembly of the MDC, a position that I served in the MDC, and then later deployed into communications of the opposition movement. So this, I think, is a brief history of my involvement in politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ostallos. Now, we all know that a journey such as the one you've taken is not one that you take alone. So, are you able to say who were the people that were walking with you through this journey and, well, pretty much up to this time?
Thank you very much. That's a quite difficult question. I think that in every phase of my life, in student leadership, I had comrades. Of course, the immediate mentorship for us in the Students' Union was the Zimbabwe National Students' Union, as was led by President Pride Mkono, popularly known as Obama, in the Students' Union, who was the president at the time. I think those were our immediate mentors, and of course, a number of former student leaders who had led the union, who were then introduced it, comrade like Comrade Obed Masaraure, who's leading the teachers union at this present juncture, and other leaders were able to provide mentorship for us in the students union, and of course in the politics of the opposition was obviously the leader of the Youth Assembly, then Comrade Ziba, the General Secretary of the Youth Assembly, then Comrade Chinopusa, and of course the then Secretary for Policy, later Vice President, and now President Advocate Nelson Chamisa, was able to guide us in terms of our involvement in leadership and as youth activists. Of course, there are a number of people that I might not be able to mention now, but in short, I think, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. Mzala Tom, do you have a follow-up question?
Okay, yeah, maybe Ostallos, you can tell us about how you navigated through the splits, rebrandings, and all within the opposition movement to end up being where you are. What were the key deciding factors for you to end up being part of CCC?
Thank you very much. That's a tough one, but look, it's part of our history. You know that in opposition politics and in politics in general, contradictions emerge. Contradiction which at a certain historic epoch, some are ideological, some are on policy differences, some are in terms of different strategic intervention to the national question. And because of that, political movements and political parties, because of these differences on fundamental issues that are at the center of movement, find themselves splitting ways, at times finding each other and moving ahead. We were not spared from these contradictions, not just in our participation in the mainstream opposition movement, but also in the Students' Union itself, in terms of who should be deployed as the Zimbabwe National Students' Union candidate. We saw it when we went to the university as first years. The union deployed basically 3 presidential candidates, and as first years we were forced to make a decision. And of course, I chose a decision to support Makombora Aruzivishe, who was our presidential candidate, after Comrade Agents Gumbo, who was the immediate past president. That explains my history and close relationship with Comrade Mako. And we managed to support Mako. Unfortunately, that election was never held, but it introduced us to this level of contradictions in the movement. And of course, when there were splits in mainstream opposition political party, in particular the MDC, the students' union will not be spared because of also its certain inclination and relationship with the labor movement, the MDC. As you know, that the formative social base of the movement for democratic change in September 1999 was the students' union, the labor movement, civil society, and the church as the founding basis of the infrastructure of the social democratic movement, after realization of the need that Zimbabwe needs a progressive political movement, because whatever all these movements were trying to address in their sectorial groups could only be achieved when there was an alternative government. So it is out of this relationship that the students' union has with the mainstream opposition that made us not to be spared when contradictions emerge. But I had an opportunity to be mentored by people who were both in the movement and those who were outside, who were able to, particularly those who had seen the party splitting before, were able to understand that the students' union must maintain its autonomy and be able to understand that some of these differences really do not reflect our differences as young people. Therefore, we're able to navigate the terrain of difficulties. The party splitted in 2014. And I remember having a conversation with Comrade Mlambo after we had a program of mentorship with one of the comrades in the leadership of the party right now, who was able to tell us about the contradictions that had emerged and the need for us to understand that Dr. Richard Tsvangrai had made fundamental flaws in terms of decisions and discussions that were happening in the party. But that did not mean that it was strategic for the party to bring another leader. That was how we explained in terms of the split that was happening in 2014 when we were in the Students' Union. And therefore, we went to Harvest House for the first time, and President Tsvangrai was addressing and explaining to people why the party had gone to a split. So it is out of that conversation that we're able to understand Dr. Mock and Richard Tsvangrai in that perspective, to the level and extent that when I was president, we managed to invite Dr. Mock and Richard Tsvangrai to the Students' Union in Prestige House at the University of Zimbabwe to come and address students, because we had been coached or oriented and made to understand Dr. Tsvangrai in terms of his perspective, because I would not lie, in the academic spheres, it was seemingly an unpopular decision at the time, because the dominant academics and the middle class had a consensus around the fact that the MDC needed a new leader. So these are some of the issues that emerged. And of course, there were all these phases of attending a congress and your preferred candidate, in particular when President Chamisa did not emerge as Secretary General. We had our own naive views about the need for President Chamisa to come up with a new movement. And these ways were very simple. Look, this is what has happened, but it is not good. It is not ideal. It is not strategic. It is not the quality of leadership that we should be able to find our way out because of this. And we were naive young people and were able to understand the politics of the party. And when some of the contradictions emerged later, we're now mature enough to understand that contradictions emerge, comrades differ on policy, comrades differ on a program of action, comrades differ on certain strategic issues, but it's always more important to keep the democratic contingent united and waging a collective fight, because at the end of the day, all these compatriots and comrades, as was articulated by Dr. Morgan Richard Tsvangrai in the launch of the MDC Alliance then, that all the progressive comrades and Democrats must be able to find each other, which was a very important step and a lesson to us as young people, that at all material times we have got a duty, a moral and political obligation to always bring and unite comrades together, because contradictions emerge, but there is one agenda, there is one vision, there is one mission. The mission is to bring change and transformation in our country. And so we have to develop internal mechanism to ensure that contradictions are managed, to ensure that when contradictions emerge, people don't lose track of the strategic central objective of the democratic contingent as a whole. I thank you.
Thank you so much for your eloquent response to that issue. Perhaps for the benefit of our listeners, can you shed light on the impact of not only the impact but the influence of national politics on student politics in the context, for example, of the University of Zimbabwe? What roles do big parties like ZANU-PF and opposition play in student politics? And how does this affect your elections? How does it affect the issues that become the electoral issues whenever there are SRC elections, for example, in the context of the University of Zimbabwe? How does the politics play out? Does it also reflect on the national politics as well?
Thank you very much. I think I will take a quotation from Lenmo Jongwe. With respect, may his soul rest in peace. Jongwe says, students world over are known for initiating and executing revolutions, and Zimbabwe is not an exception. So he says these words at a time when the students in Indonesia were revolting against dictatorship and fascism. I say this because one of our most key statements at the university was that the student is a worker in transit. So the student cannot be separated from the struggles of ordinary people in Zimbabwe. And more importantly, for the students' union in Zinaso, the students' union was the torch bearer of democracy. The students' union was the vanguard of the oppressed. It means that it speaks for and on behalf of the oppressed. And who are the oppressed? The oppressed are young, unemployed people. The oppressed are men and women eking out a living through informal sector vending. The oppressed are those who have retired and are not getting anything from government as per what is expected of our retirement policy. So the students' union is conscientized to an extent that and I'm speaking here at least from my experience in Zimbabwe National Students Union. I'm not so sure about other ZANU-PF moribund students organization, but in the Students Union, as was founded in 97 by Lenmo Jongwe, we were oriented and taught that we speak on behalf of those who have not afforded to go to university. So we must be able to articulate with clarity and precision the concrete realities of ordinary people. That's why Students' Union in the formative stages, in fact, in the first phase of the post-independent Zimbabwe, Arthur Mtambara Munyara Gwisa and others demonstrate at the University of Zimbabwe after the assassination of Samora Machel. So these are regional and international issues. That's why students at the University of Zimbabwe demonstrated against Mugabe's attempt to create a one-party state. So what it means is that the student becomes the driving force of class consciousness in society. So it becomes the voice of reason because they've been given a mandate to drive that level of political discourse in a country. So that's how for us in the Students' Union we're operating. But of course, the Students' Union is autonomous. I believe personally that the Students' Union must maintain its autonomy. It must not be an extension of a political party because political parties have got their own political objective and the most critical being the objective to attain political power. And Students' Union are part and parcel of civic voices in society that must be able to question either political party that is in government because they have a responsibility in their own sectorial universities to be able to speak about academic freedom, to be able to demand the freedom of being a research, and they have to do that without fear or favor. So the Students' Union can't be an extension of a political party. The Students' Union can't get its agenda from the political party, but it must define the agenda for political parties. For example, the Students' Union will demand, as for us in the left movement, we were clear that the creation of an egalitarian society is what we aspire for. And therefore, any government, whether the government led by Mugabe or the government to be led by Dr. Tsvangirai then, must be able to be clear in its policy pronunciation that there will be free education from primary up to university. So the student must be able to be clear in terms of their demand, but also to be speaking on behalf of the oppressed, to be able to champion and deliver and unpack the kind of society that political parties must be able to be driving at the level of policy in our country. So I think that the students' union must be the watchdog of political parties, must be the watchdog really of government, so that they monitor whether political parties and government officials are able. If you remember that the Willowgate scandal was questioned at the University of Zimbabwe by students, leaders, to the level and extent that it necessitated government. Of course, there were other pressures from other sections of society, but the students' union was central. Again, the students' union was critical in reminding war veterans in this country that remember that at the center of the liberation project was the issue of land and the issue of the economy. And the willing buyer, willing seller program is not sufficient to answer the question of landless in our country. And thereby reminding war veterans of their conscious ideological disposition of the objective of the liberation struggle, to the level and extent that we saw veterans now demonstrating, some carrying placards that Mugabe, we throned you and we dethroned you, and driving the agenda that in Zimbabwe there must be land expropriation. So these are critical national questions raised and addressed by students. So I believe that the students' union must maintain its level as the torch bearers of democracy in society, and holding those that are in power to account, rather than being an extension of a political party. I think.
Thank you so much. Let me hand over to Mapoko to wind up her section.
No worries. Thank you very much, Mzala. Ostallos, there was something that you touched on earlier when you were speaking around the MDC splits, lessons learned, and all the contradictions at the time, whilst you were a young politician. And when we now look at the new Triple C, are you able to say what your contributions were to the formation of the new party?
Thank you very much. Our generation is indebted to the Citizens Coalition for Change and this leadership collective for giving us an opportunity to be part and parcel of the big history in our country, considering that Triple C is going to form the next government. So we have been part and parcel of the historical narrative of the pro-democracy movement, but more important, of the movement that brought change and real transformation in our country. We, by virtue of being young people in the politics of our country, were privileged to participate in the building of a new political movement. But more importantly for me is really about the platform presented to us by the leadership collective of the Citizens Coalition for Change, to give us an opportunity to be able to give our views and thoughts in terms of the kind of society that we want to see, the kind of society that we want to envision, but also to speak on behalf of the oppressed. So it's a very important part of the history of our country, that is a generation, like Fanon would all have said, the critical question that we're grappling with as young people. At least I speak on behalf of those that have interfaced with and those that have not directly, but who believe in the broad generational agenda to bring transformation in our country. We had a critical conversation when we formed generational consensus in 2018 that, look, Franz Fanon says each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. And we're grappling with the question of what is our mission? How do we play a role to the broad cause to make our country a better place? Conscious of the realities that this is a very difficult path, it comes with huge consequences. I was thrown into Chikurupi maximum prison at a very tender age, and naked contact with violence and torture in ZANU-PF torture chambers. But we were oriented sufficiently enough to understand that this struggle is not about ourselves. This struggle is about leaving a mark in the annals of history, that when there was dictatorship in our country, we managed to speak out so that future generations can be able to understand that we might not have gotten there, but we set the initial steps for our country to progress towards progressive development and, of course, upliftment of the ordinary people. So We have been given this privilege by the Citizens Coalition for Change. You know that our opponent has been facing a lot of challenges in terms of providing a platform for young people, particularly in our own generation, that is those between the ages of 18 and 35, to be in the strategic sectors of leadership deployment in the political organization, because there is a really deep-seated cultural problem in our country, or an ageist mentality that those that are young must lead tomorrow. That tomorrow never comes. But we have been provided with the platform in the Citizens Coalition for Change to be able to provide our ideas, but also to be mentored, to be able to understand, because yes, you don't have the experience, you don't have the exposure, but there is collective wisdom from those who have walked the path before, who are able to guide us as we execute this important national duty. So for me, the Citizens Coalition has been a great home for young people, has been a great home for our own generation in terms of providing a platform for young people to be able to provide and save their country. Thank you.